but Anita Sarkeesian's series on women in video games. I find it to be a completely one-sided argument. I find it to be almost completely dismissible, and she's actually lying and taking things out of context to prove her arguments. I just wanted to quickly break down, or at least try to be quick. Lots of people have already broken down her video and dissected almost every piece. Mr. Epsilon and the Amazing Atheist. They do a much better job than me at, arguing against her. Check out their videos. Both, I watched them all. They're amazing. This is just my point of view. First off, she says that she has two different definitions of what violence against women in video games is, and that's what her entire series is about. It's these tropes that women are violently attacked in video games because they're women, or they're women being attacked. That's contradictory to what she said. And then she says that women are portrayed as weak in video games, and that there's this chauvinistic, patriarchal, view of video games. I think it's a load of shit. And here's my reason. First, I'm going to start with the violence. She thinks that, first off, there's two different definitions of what she has as violence against women in video games. There's one where it's just women, violence against women just in general, and then there's violence against women because they're women. Because of their gender, because of their sexuality, because they're a woman, they're violently acted against. For the first one, yes, there is violence towards women in video games. There's also violence towards men in video games. That's not really a fucking surprise. It would actually be more surprising and more sexist if there was no violence against women in video games. Or if there was no violence against men in video games. Video games would be boring then. But in my years of playing video games, in my actual years of playing video games, unlike you, who's lied about it multiple times, in the countless games I've played, I've never experienced, to my knowledge, any sort of violence towards a woman because she was a woman. No character has ever gone, "You're a woman, so I'm gonna blow your fucking brains out." That's never happened. Because if it did, it would be stupid. Now then, maybe there's a game that I haven't played yet that, shows violence towards women because they're women. It's probably in the Duke Nukem game, actually. I haven't played it because it's terrible. And I'll get to my point about games like Duke Nukem in a minute. But first off, I wanted to call BS on your tropes, which is a horrible word. It's just themes. It's what happens. First off, the demographics of who is actually playing these games. Mostly it's men like me. Mostly. Now then, that's not to say that women don't play video games. Women, of course, play video games. So do old guys, so do young people. Everybody plays video games, it's just mostly it's guys like me. Teenagers to young adults playing video games. So, of course, we're the audience most game companies are targeting. Now then, there are games like totally obscure, like Flower and Thomas Was Alone, and they appeal to everybody. There are kids' games, appeal directly to children. But it's mostly us playing video games, and it's mostly us who are going to be spending a lot of money on video games. So, there's a reason you don't see a lot of female protagonists in games. Now then, that's not to say there aren't female protagonists. I'll give you a few examples in a few minutes. But the reason there are mostly male protagonists are, one, because they write stories to focus on us. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, guys don't watch The View and go, why don't they talk about more guy topics? Because it's a show mostly watched by women. Guys don't watch, and that's not to say that all women watch The View. I mean, I'm not trying to be sexist here. I may come off as sexist, but trust me, I'm not. The problem is, when you go into a place dominated by a certain market and then expect it to cater to you, who that market is not for, there is going to be some disdain. There is going to be some disappointment. for example, if I go into a department store looking for clothing, and I do this all the time, and I've noticed this, if I go into a clothing store, chances are about 70% of that clothing store is dedicated to women's clothing. Not men's clothing. Women's clothing. And that's kind of annoying to me. But at the same time, I'm not going to complain about it. Because those stores have realized that mostly women are shopping there. So they're catering to their market. That's not a bad thing. And it happens with both sexes. I just gave you an example. Video games cater to men usually. Clothing stores cater to women usually. That's not trying to be sexist. I'm not saying there's plenty of other examples of stores that aren't so seemingly offensive, that aren't so stereotypical. It's just they're catering towards their market. That's all that's happening. It's not a sexist thing. It's not saying that women are weaker and that they don't want to have video games targeted towards women. They do. It's just they're so few and far between because they're not going to make the money they need to off that to be successful. Just to, say that it's never that you want it to stop being a thing. I mean, yes, there are tales like origin stories and how somebody became a character. There's plenty of different stories that portray women in positive lights. And there are plenty of stories that are seemingly sexist, as you say, they make women weak. They portray women as weak in stories. It's dumb. It's a coincidence. That character, because it could have easily been replaced by a man. You could have easily switched the roles. In fact, some games have switched the roles. There was a DS game that starred Peach saving Mario. They just flipped the roles. And that's all. I didn't feel, no one played that game and went, as a man, I feel weaker. Because that's a dumb. That's just, that's a dumb, yeah. It's dumb to think that. I'm not calling you dumb. I'm just saying it's dumb to think that. There's just... So, are women weak in video games? Are women weak in video games? No. I went into my collection of video games, and I picked out all the games that portray women in a positive light. Not necessarily as the main character, but games that portray women in a positive light. Here's what I found just after a few minutes of looking. Just looking at games and going, yes, yes, yes. Not thinking in depth into the plot as if there was some obscure character I missed, because there probably is in almost every single one of my games. But I'm going to give a few select examples that I picked out, because these are the best examples that you seem to just ignore, as if they don't exist. But they do, and they prove you wrong, which is probably why you're ignoring them. There's Elizabeth from BioShock Infinite, a strong female, not necessarily a lead, but, she's there. And I'm not going to ruin anything in the story, I'm not going to go into the story, but she does play an important part, and she's not portrayed as weak, and she's not portrayed as owned by Booker. That's bullshit, because it doesn't happen. She makes her own choices. All of them do. Well, they don't really make their own choices, but they have their choices written for them by, someone who wrote the story. Same with the guys. They're not owned by anybody. There is no sense of ownership. It's complicated. A man doesn't own his wife, but a man cares about his wife. And that's not ownership, that's just caring. Same way a wife cares about her husband. That's not ownership. That's, giving a shit. That's not ownership, that's giving a shit. Second is Lara Croft, and that's one of the bigger examples. The Tomb Raider game that didn't just came out. That came out recently, semi-recently. It's a relatively new game in comparison to game history, and it's amazing. And it's the origin story of Lara Croft, and she is portrayed as a freaking badass. She, shoots people with a bow and arrow and kills people with a climbing axe, and it shows her origin story of how she saved another woman. So, by saving a woman, does she somehow make women weaker, despite the fact that she's making women stronger? Does it kind of cancel itself out? I don't know. Your logic is really hard to follow. It's a train of thought that I just can't seem to grasp. Next is Shell from the Portal series. Strong woman. Fighting GLaDOS, another woman. saving, not really saving anybody, but whatever. Jodie Holmes from Beyond Two Souls. Strong female lead. The protagonist. In fact, not Elizabeth from Bioshock Infinite, but with Lara Croft from Tomb Raider, Shell from the Portal series, and Jodie Holmes from Beyond, you play as these women. You play. They are the only character in some of these cases that you play as. With Jodie Holmes from Beyond, you make your own decisions, and she's so realistically put into this character. And yes, oh, you may play Beyond and go, oh, it's sexist that she has to, dress up for a date in the game. Well, that's dumb, because she also does so much more in the game. She goes to a war zone. She fights to save people. She does all of these amazing things. And she proves that women are strong. Next is Avelina from the game Assassin's Creed 3 Liberation, which is the Vita game. You play the only assassin. I think it's the only Assassin's Creed game where you play as a woman. Badass assassin. Again, strong female. She saves slaves in that game. She dresses up, as like a. This isn't a whole part of the game. This isn't the entirety of the game. She dresses up as, like in those big fancy dresses and goes to these parties. And the next minute she's dressed as an assassin, just killing men in the streets because they're bad. That's really the only reason. I mean, there's probably more of the story. Whatever. The next one is really one that seems almost contradictory. Call of Duty Ghosts. In Call of Duty Ghosts, you can customize your character and choose the gender of them, and that they will be that gender every time, which means you can be a woman. And you can shoot other dudes in the face. Again, women are strong. Not necessarily in the campaign. I don't know if there's any women even in the campaign. But in the multiplayer, you can play as a woman. And you can kick ass. That's, it portrays women as strong. It portrays women. And you can be, if you're a woman, you can be a woman. And then kick other guys' asses. Next is Ellie from The Last of Us. Another badass female. She kicks ass in The Last of Us, and you get to play as her. Well, not necessarily for most of the game, you still get to play as her. And you may look at the game and go, oh, well, Joel is just rescuing her, and that depowers her as a woman. That's bullshit. Because he's not claiming ownership. He's saving her life, usually. That's what's happening in the game. So you would rather her die and be able to, die and be like, oh, well, at least she died a woman. It's a horrible argument. Next is Claire Redfield from the Resident Evil series. There's more women in the Resident Evil series, by the way, like Jill Valentine. But Claire Redfield is one of the someone you play as. She's another badass female. And last on my short list, because I could go on, are two women, Chloe and Elena from the Uncharted series. Amazing females who end up saving Nathan Drake's ass multiple times. They're not portrayed as weak. They're portrayed as strong usually. Sometimes stronger than Nathan Drake himself. Sometimes smarter than him too. They're portrayed as equals in the game. And that's how it should be. Not in every game. And don't call me sexist for saying that, because I'll explain. In some games, the man is the protagonist and is above everybody in the freaking universe. They're the one destined to save, they're the only one who can save the universe, who can save the world. It's been all entrusted to them, in which case, yes, they are above it. But at the same time, you have games like Tomb Raider and Beyond. Both games where they are, in Beyond, if it wasn't for Jodie, the world would be dead. Just completely fucked. But because of her, she's the only one who can save the world, which means she is better than every guy in that game. Every guy in that universe, she's better than. See what I'm saying? There's give and take. There's women who are, in some game universes, women are better than men. There's just one woman who's better than all men and all women and everybody. Some video games, the man is better than everybody else too. Just depends on which game you play. Another point you made was mercy killings and how it's terrible and how they beg for death. You called it the euthanized damsel or something? Something stupid like that. So what? I mean, it's bad. Yes, it's sad that women die. It's also sad that men die. It's sad that when anybody, who you've developed a very strong emotional connection to, dies in a video game, because you've developed emotional connection. And if the writer of the game has succeeded in doing what they should have done, you gave a crap about that character. You wanted them to live. Because they died, it was sad. Now then, I do admit that some games throw away their characters' lives like they're nothing. Like, any backstory you have, and they just throw it away in this very non-climactic moment, and they act like it's nothing. But that happens with men just as much, if not more, than it happens with women. Because, as you said, men are more prominent in video games, so wouldn't that mean that men die more in video games? I would say so. I remember far more men dying and getting killed and being that, sacrificing themselves than women. And that's not to say that women don't do it because they're weaker. It's just because women are less prominent in video games. So, I don't really see your point in saying that it's just a plot device. It's something meant to usually it's meant to give the character a reason to fight. It's not because they lost ownership. It's not this, they're doing it because it took away their manhood. That's stupid. They're doing it because they gave a crap about the person. Sometimes it's for revenge that they're fighting, and sometimes it's because there might be a way to save the person, or to avenge them, or to fulfill their last wish. It all depends on the game. So to generalize it is stupid, but also to just claim it in any way is stupid. Yes, there are some games which the mercy killing of a female is stupid. It's ridiculous how it's done. But in other games, it's done tastefully. And it's not, the woman didn't sacrifice herself for nothing. And it didn't make her weak. In fact, it sometimes makes her strong. It all depends on the game. This is another big point that I have, and it's the sexuality in video games. And I'm not saying sexuality is in, hetero and homosexuality. I'm talking about the sexuality as in, boobs right in your fucking face. A big game that I played recently that shows this is Deadpool. Another example is the Duke Nukem games. It's the same type of thing when you go into a movie like Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. You know what you're expecting when you play that game. When you put that game in your console, you know what you're getting into. It's painfully clear for some of these games. Now, in some games, they don't make it clear, and therefore, it's wrong. They kind of duped you. Oh well. But a lot of these games, like Deadpool and Duke Nukem, if you watch the trailer, sometimes if you even just look at the game, you understand that it's a game catered totally towards this, bro-style person. Now, then, Deadpool is not really for a bro-style person. It's for Deadpool comic fans. But Deadpool is the type of character that, has these women and, fantasizes over boobs and stuff, because it's just his character. And Duke Nukem is almost the same way, except less tastefully done. So, what's the problem? If you don't want to play a game with, sexuality towards women, don't play it. It's the same reason, you don't go see a stupid action movie like The Expendables if you want to go see a movie with a coherent plot. You just don't try to take a game for more than it is. If a game promises to be nothing more than a good time, and, if a game promises to make boob jokes and sex jokes and dirty jokes and just be gratuitously violent like Deadpool, don't look at it and try to find more than what it's saying it'll give you. Just judge it based on what it says it'll give you. If your games are talking to you, by the way, you might have a problem.
I'm doing video games, so it's not exactly a fandom. I'm not a fan of video games. I actually had to learn a lot about video games in the process of making this.
Grand Theft Auto is a very poor example because, like I said before, it's very subjective to say that it's misogynistic. Because I can say as much as anybody else that it has violence against men in the video games. Because what are you killing in video games? Mostly men. Who are the people you're killing mostly in video games? Mostly men. I would say 95%, if not more, of the enemies that you kill in video games are men. Anita, they're men. And the thing about it is that GTA is such a poor example because it basically shows me, and I'll even use, because I saw Thunderfoot's video on it, and he made a very good analogy where you see a person like Sarah Palin that went for VP back in I believe 2008 with, of course, President Obama's election. And you see her, Sarah Palin, every time she would have interviews, and people are saying, "Oh, what sources did you get them from?" "Oh, well, I got them from a variety of sources." "Okay, name me one." "Oh, well, I got them from, them all of them. All of them." Name me something specific. "Oh, it's like, Sarah Palin, I'm going to call it out. She's an idiot. Point blank. Not, no, of course, if all you feminists that are watching, no, it's not because she's a woman. It's because she's point blank an idiot. It's because she doesn't back up her claims. She claims so many stuff, but she doesn't have anything to back it up. And to be honest, she's probably pulling most of the stuff out of her butt. Let's be honest here. I mean, if you can't back up a civil plane, why should I be able to trust you or trust what you have to say? My point being to Anita, where she can't even name 3 video games that rightfully so back up her main point of mistreatment of women in video games, and she has very, very weak points. I've seen a lot of videos, she has very weak points. A lot of the games, I know she hasn't played it in full. She just picks it from a bag, cherry picks it, and automatically deems it as misogynistic. But if you play those video games, which a lot of them I have played, are not misogynistic, or a lot of them, they have a specific reason for why those things happen. My point being, one time, and then I'll get into the next topic, where she used BioShock as one of her examples. One of my favorite video games of all time. And one of the things I didn't like was she says that there was a scene where you see Andrew Ryan, and this is a scene where Jack is inside, I believe, I forgot which area he was in, but it was a part where he sees Andrew Ryan, which is, I don't want to spoil it for you guys, but let's just say Andrew Ryan, who's very key to the story. He goes into a room where there's a prostitute, and is seen killing the prostitute. And she say, "Oh, see right there, mistreatment of women in video games, that shouldn't happen," even though I'll give you guys to download the specific reason why it happened. There was a scandal that was going on between Andrew Ryan and Fontaine, where I believe that particular woman, I forgot her name, but I know she's key to the story, where they were having a relationship together for a specific reason. I don't want to spoil it for you guys. But then she was doing something where she was giving information, kind of like in treason in a sense, where she was doing something where she was maliciously trying to give information to Fontaine for some reason. I haven't played the game in so long, but I know that she was in the wrong and she was doing something. Now, was it necessarily right for him to kill her? No, that's not besides the point. The point being is that there was a specific reason why it happened. It wasn't because she's a woman. It was because it's like for anything like somebody committing treason in the U.S. or something like that. It's not because they're a woman, or it's because it can be anybody. It can be a male or female or whatever. But getting back to, not to digress too much, but getting back to the main point, those are just an example of one of the things that I see where the person like this cherry picks or just picks something out of the bag, automatically says, "Oh, it's misogynistic, just misogynistic." And then when you actually look into the video game, they're not even in the slightest. For instance, I know she used another example with a game called Hitman. We see in the game, Hitman, you just have, you just drag, women's bodies around like a body bag. I can do the same thing to men. In fact, you actually get degraded points, or it's actually played against you to kill women. They actually have a system in there where it's not good for you to kill women. Oh, but because it's in place there, automatically it's misogynistic. Even though the same thing happens to men in the video games, very the same. In fact, the people you're supposed to kill are the men. Or the men, Anita, the men. So why is it that because of a certain function in the video game that you already have to point it out that it's misogynistic, and that the main point of the game is for you to kill or for you to condemn women, which is not true at all. Because like you said, like I said before, if you play these video games, you actually delve into them, you find out a lot of that stuff isn't true. It's not true. That'll be my best segment here, because I've actually looked online of female heroines that I love in video games, a lot of video games that have female heroines. And right off the bat, the first link that I saw, 50 beautiful, representations of heroine women in video games. And guess what, Anita? They're all clothed. Most of them are clothed. Newsflash, most of them have their full clothes on. For point being an example, Tomb Raider, wonderful game, Lara Croft, great heroine character. Everybody, a wide variety, a wide audience. People love that game ever since the 90s. Metroid, Samus Aran, of course, a big person in the heroine aspects of video gaming. Then you have Bayonetta. You have the girl from Blood Rain. You have Elizabeth from BioShock. She had her own solo game that tied in very heavily to the BioShock storyline. If you played BioShock Burial at Sea Part 2, then you have, of course, Madison Page from Heavy Rain. Then you have Alex Vance from Half-Life. Then you have Jill Valentine from Resident Evil. You have Shell from Portal. You have Joanne Dark from Perfect Dark, one of my favorite all-time FPS games of ever. Then you have, of course, what else do we have? You have Jade from Beyond and Good and Evil. We have Commander Shepard, the female version, in a wide variety of ethnicities, and I'll get to ethnicity in a minute. And, of course, we have Faith from Mirror's Edge. And, like I said, there's so many more. That's only a handful of great heroines in video games that Anita doesn't seem to acknowledge. Doesn't seem to acknowledge them at all. I don't see one of her videos saying, but I don't see one of format of her video where she says, yes, there are some damsels in distress that I don't like, but in addition to that, we have so-and-so and so-and-so that are a good uplifting representation of women in video games. Not once have I ever heard her say that. Not once have I ever heard her mention these great women that are represented in video games. Not one time. And I can't be wrong. And Anita, if you're watching this video, please correct me. Like I said, I would love to discuss this. I would love to discuss these issues and really get a chance to see your actual, views on how you feel about these particular issues. Moving on. Now, one thing I would like to give a challenge to Anita is this. Name me 3 video games that represent African Americans in light that is heroic, intelligent, and let's say ethically correct. Name me 3. Excuse me. In the comments below, just for example reference, I want you guys to name me 3 African American representations of video games as main characters that are, again, heroic and everything else above. Name me 3. Okay, so moving on. Actually, like I said before, 50 Cent, Bulletproof, games like that, which are just, a gangster representation of African Americans in video games, and GTA San Andreas, they don't count. They simply do not count. And my point being is this. You're claiming all these things about women, yet actually I can argue that there is little to none good representations of African American in video games. For that matter, even stretch it a little more to Latino or other ethnicities in video game. Granted, Faith is actually from Asian descent, and again, a female in a video game, but and it's from Mirror's Edge. Like I said, there is a very limited number of African American leads in video games that doesn't have to do with crime, drugs, or shooting up places or stuff like that. I can easily argue that. But a lot of people like to overlook this because a lot of feminists, they like to put themselves in the forefront, and they don't like to actually see the truth on the matter and what's really going on, and a lot of these things that do happen in these particular venues that I feel strongly needs to be addressed.